Artivism is executive produced by ArtUp, hosted by Linda Steele, produced, directed, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN. This is Linda Steele, and you're listening to the Artivism podcast on the KUDZUKIAN network. My guest today is Brittney Bullock, and Brittney's been on the show before with her husband, Jamon Bullock. Hey, Brittney.
Hey.
So I want you to introduce yourself and let our listeners know exactly who you are and what you do. You are definitely an artist, an artivist, but tell us more.
Right. So I'm a creative entrepreneur, visual artist. That work is mostly around textiles. I'm a leathersmith. I work in the creative youth development space. Really, there are several things that are in my realm and that I choose to do here in the city and beyond. But those things mostly really revolve around the visual aspect and also creative youth development. So, yeah.
So I actually really love Brittney's work, and give us a little hint about some of the things that people can see on Instagram when they follow you in terms of your work.
So I absolutely love the idea of manipulating materials, and currently my work is really rooted in the idea of portraiture, but using unconventional materials to convey portraits. And so I use my sewing machine to do that. I really while in college, I really loved illustration, but I was a horrible illustrator.
Really?
Absolutely. And most of my work was really in the three-dimensional space. So I did a lot of sculpture and ceramic things, but absolutely would die if I could really, really be a great illustrator. And so in that, while playing around in my studio, really trying to find an avenue to still get to an illustrative quality, I taught myself how to draw portraits with my sewing machine. And so it still allows me to have that particular finesse and quality of a fine line, but it's also very loose and fluid enough to where I still get the just that idea of this is a portrait with those fine lines, but it's not exactly right? Because I really can't portray that skill level. I want to though, and so I really love the juxtaposition of that idea of using an unconventional material to convey something that's really exact in a way, and letting that idea of the line from the thread be created, and that tension between sewing something and really if you pull this one thread it will all come apart. And so all of those things are factored into the conceptual thinking of my work, and it's super exciting. So,
and you also do for our listeners who love their accessories, you do some things like that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm also a leathersmith, and I find pure joy in the idea of the process. And so usually the work that I'm creating is very rooted in tedious work. And so any way that I can use work, I hand stitch my work, and it's all about the process. And those things turn into, wallets, to bookmarks, to just personal items for you to have in your home. These really personal art objects that you value, that hopefully last over time and stand the test of time. And so it's pretty amazing. Just the other day, I made a shelf with leather straps in my studio because I needed the shelf.
I saw that.
And literally, I love the idea of textiles because you can manipulate it so much, and it's so it's just freeing in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
And you got my message that I want to buy.
Yes, I definitely did.
So Brittney's work is beautiful, and you're going to want to visit her Instagram, and we'll tell you more about that later. And Brittney is an artivist, and these are the types of individuals that you get to hear from and about on the Artivism podcast, brought to you by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
In our studio today, we've got Shelby County Mayor Mark Luttrell. Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you for accepting it. You know that you could have been doing a bunch of other things. But you're hanging out here getting funky with us. That's
and it's interesting you say that, because I enjoy just pulling up your interviews and reading back over and listening to them and just learning a lot about the city.
So understand that the mayor is a fan of funky politics.
Funky Politics, Saturday afternoons at 5 p.m. here on WYPL.
You're listening to Artivism. Artivism features conversations with artists, creatives, and citizens working at the intersection of art and social activism. And I'm Linda Steele, your host. I'm a grant maker, change maker, social venture capitalist, and I invest in individuals and projects that use the arts as a vehicle for social change. My guest today is Brittney Bullock. We're going to talk a little bit more with Brittney. She has some exciting news, and I've been talking to Brittney as she's a creative entrepreneur and a hybrid individual and artivist, and this is yet another component of her work. And Brittney, I just want you to talk about the other component of your work, the creative entrepreneur, the artivism part, and that big news that you have right now to share it with our listeners.
Yeah, so my artistic practice is really also rooted in spirituality, right? And so I do believe that the work that I create and this gift that I was given is much bigger than me. And in that idea, I've always thought, how can me, this one individual, use my talents, my gifts that go beyond just my studio space. And that has allowed me to creatively think about how I can position myself as an artist in communities. In addition to that, I was able to go through the fellowship program, which I think really was a launch pad for me. Before entering into that program, I knew that artists could sit at a very unique space where they could use their craft to really address some bigger things. I didn't necessarily know what it looked like or where I sat in that, but I knew it was possible. And going through the fellowship program really allowed me to gain not only the knowledge, but some of the exemplars who are doing that nationally. And I say all the time that I am forever grateful for that opportunity, because it really opened my eyes to what artists could really be doing to some social change and some social impact things of the world. And so
for the listeners, can you tell us a little bit quickly, because we want to get into your work, about the Fellows Program, what that is?
Yeah, sure. So I am a 2015 graduate, and I was a part of a really small all-woman cohort, and so it's essentially a journey. I like to explain it as a journey, and it's a journey for not only artists, but arts administrators and community leaders who are willing and interested to expand and change their mindset and beliefs around what art can actually do. Very simply put. And so it's an opportunity for people to come together, to share with one another, to learn from one another, and then also put some things in action. And so again, an inspiring opportunity for me, very special for Memphis, I think, as well. Before the fellowship program, there wasn't anything like that here in the city, and I'm a native Memphian in this art space. And so it's really, really special and unique to Memphis, and can definitely really elevate, I think, the way in which we think about arts and culture, but also elevate some of the artists and other people in the city in really getting them to the next level. So that experience happened for me, and it was during that time where I was asking myself a lot of questions, right? What is my role as an artist? What is my role as a civically engaged artist, right? Why is art important right now today? Can art really shift mindset and beliefs, but also can it really shift some social injustices of the world? Like, can we really use it as a tool? And those questions that were coming up for me, that I was sitting with, really launched this community work that I was doing. So I have had the pleasure of working in Klondike Smoky City, which is a neighborhood in the North Memphis area.
Tell us a little bit about North Memphis and the significance of Klondike Smoky City. Yeah,
so Klondike is one of the oldest African American communities in our city. The name Smoky City, it has been said that it was a manufacturing neighborhood, and so they called it Smoky City because of the smoke that used to kind of come up from the production there. But really, Klondike and Smoky City were two separate neighborhoods, and they joined together in the late 90s. And it is a community that is rich in history, rich in legacy, and is full of opportunity. And Memphis is one of those unique places that the streets are like overflowing with stories, and I'm still learning those stories today, but they're locked in Klondike. It's also a community that is, in my opinion, looked over quite a bit. It's adjacent to two other neighboring communities that have been redeveloped or revitalized, if you will. And
one is the Crosstown.
That's right. One is the Crosstown project, the Crosstown neighborhood. The other is the Uptown neighborhood. And so very close, like literally in the center of those. It is also a neighborhood very much like in other communities in Memphis, where a lot of the assets are dwindling, right? So some of the schools are closing, right? The access to food and resources all of that is a challenge. And so it's an opportunity and not even an opportunity, it's really a necessary thing that resources and assets are a part of this neighborhood and are put back into the neighborhood. And so I've had the pleasure to work with my partner, Quincy Morris, who is the director at the Klondike Smoky City Community Development Corporation. And I actually got to Miss Quincy through a former employer, and I stuck around because of the work that she was doing, and just the love that was rooted in that neighborhood. And it's a pretty special place. And through that, we cultivated and forged a relationship that was beyond just community stakeholders working together to this idea of what can we really change. And so last year we had the opportunity to pilot a entrepreneurship program for girls, and this year we were awarded national funding from the Kresge Foundation to continue that work.
Wow. The Kresge Foundation, for our listeners, is a major foundation, and they are leading and paving the way in funding projects, initiatives, organizations that are engaged in creative placemaking. And creative placement, and I love their definition of creative placemaking, because they talk about how it's the intentional integration of arts, culture, and design into the community development and community revitalization process, with a real emphasis on low-income communities and communities of color. And this is a really, really big deal, listeners. So by talking to Brittney and listening to Brittney, you can learn more about this work, but then also how you might want to investigate Kresge and see if you have some sort of program that's going on at your organization or your initiative that might be something that could possibly be funded by this foundation. So tell us more about what you're doing in this entrepreneurship program.
Yeah, so it's really rooted in the idea of community, the actual community, right? The beneficiaries of resources and assets, the people who live in the place, in the space, allowing them to create solutions to community problems through an artistic practice, right? And so what that means is we teach young adults a artistic technical skill that addresses a neighborhood challenge, right? And so we walk them through the process of entrepreneurship. We walk them through this idea of what does it mean to really assess and think about what your community needs, and then allow them to collaborate together on addressing that need. Very different, right? Very different than allowing a developer to come in and address a need, right? And it's really... Or
an arts and culture institution that has a program and has a community engagement program coming in for a grant to do something like that. I always say that the solutions that we need in communities come from homegrown assets, right? They come from the people who live in the place. As an artist and a creative person, the way my mind works is, as an artist, I do want to try to solve problems, but there are people in neighborhoods who've lived in that space who have the same aspiration and the same potentially ideas that you have to create a space that makes sense for them who actually live there. So why not allow them to do that? Why would you, why would you come in with this idea and not have a conversation with the people that it's supposed to benefit? That, to me, that level of or that ideology doesn't really add up to me. And so why not, if you have the opportunity to allow people to do that, why not get out of the way? Become an ally more so than anything, right? You're not there to, you're really there to be a listener, right? And you're really there to maybe help connect the dots, but oftentimes people in communities know what they need, they know what they want, and it's just a matter of giving them the mic. And this is very important because Kresge is also based in Michigan, and a lot of their work is focused on Detroit, although they are definitely a national funder. So the type of work that they fund, like Brittney's, usually end up being models and case studies so that they can learn and others can learn about some solutions to problems that exist in Detroit's of the world, in Cleveland's, in Chicago's, in Memphis, in Oakland, in Baltimore. So the work that Brittney is doing is really very important, not only to Memphis, but to other communities around the country that are very similar to Klondike, Smoky City, North Memphis, and the city of Memphis. You are listening to the Artivism podcast on the KUDZUKIAN network. I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I'm speaking to artivist and creative entrepreneur Brittney Bullock. So Brittney, we've been talking about your great grant from the Kresge Foundation and the work you're doing in Klondike, Smoky City. I had the opportunity of seeing some of the work. I guess it would be more of like the pilot work that was funded here in Memphis. Tell us some of the lessons you learned from that experience that you're going to apply to the Kresge grant opportunity.
Yeah, so I learned a lot during that process, not only about what we need to do moving forward, but a lot about myself. My main takeaway for that project is, during the pilot year, was that allowing to share the space with wise young people is a special space to be in, but allowing them to really generate their own ideas to where they feel like that when I step away that they can still do that idea was my biggest lesson learned.
Wow.
I think that oftentimes when we create projects and we collaborate on things, that thing necessarily won't be sustainable if certain people are not still in the network or not still in the space. And for me, the biggest lesson learned was we need to be thinking about how do we create the right programming to, if anyone were to step away, the people who are benefiting from that program can still move on with the things that they have put in their toolbox, and they can still do that thing, right? That was the biggest takeaway for me. And how do we really create that type of programming and that type of culture and that type of learning where they see themselves as the leader. I am the leader of this, and I gained the knowledge that I needed to continue this work if I needed to, right? That's a big thing. I think that's also a new thing, right? In a way, especially for me, I would say, coming from the arts administrative programming world, sometimes we set up programming for us to only be doing the programming. Or we set up programming for people to kind of come in, spectate, and then leave. But what if we set up programming where people can actually come in, learn, and then do the thing themselves, right? That's the kind of programming that I think we need, right? And that also is a level of entrepreneurship.
Exactly.
Right? That is entrepreneurship. So that's the big thing. That's the really big thing. I think the other takeaway for me was young people are wise, and if you really just give them the space, to be authentically who they are, they will be just that, right? So if we as adults just step aside just a little bit, and allow them to navigate situations, solve critical problems, and make critical decisions. But if we were just to step away and just provide context and perspective when needed, but allow them to make critical decisions, they got it. These are the young people. I listen to Sabona Fu, who is like my spiritual godmother, and she talks about young people all the time, and she says young people are the past, the present, and the future. And we have to, which is why I love working with them, right? And we have to, as adults, step aside and let them lead, right? We have to do that. And so I think those were my two biggest like takeaways. It was something that I was coming into the program with an inkling of, but it was like confirmation after going through the pilot year of like, this is it.
And this is Artivism. This is what we do. And these are the type of people that we talk to. People like Brittney Bullock, entrepreneur, artist, creative youth development manager. And we've been talking to Brittney about her work specifically in Klondike Smoky City, which has been awarded a Kresge Foundation grant. And Kresge is a national funder.
I'll play the blues for you.
Blues in the Basement with Stephanie and T. Shaw.
Some great festivals going on around the tri-state area.
Got your dancing shoes?
Man, as long as I'm with you, baby, I'm always be on my toes.
Drop that zero.
Bring your blues, boo.
I got them.
We'll see you.
Thank you.
Blues in the Basement.
Thrill is gone.
Blues in the Basement, part of the KUDZUKIAN Network.
The thrill is gone away.
You're listening to Artivism. Artivism features conversations with artists, creatives, and citizens working at the intersection of art and social activism. And I'm Linda Steele, your host. I'm a grant maker, change maker, social venture capitalist, and I invest in individuals and projects that use the arts as a vehicle for social change. We're back, and you're listening to the Artivism podcast on the KUDZUKIAN network. My guest is artist and creative entrepreneur Brittney Bullock, and I'm your host, Linda Steele. Brittney, before we come to a close, I really wanted to talk about a specific aspect of your work, and that is your choice to work with African American girls. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So when starting at the inception of the program, we were very intentional about who was going to directly benefit from something like this. Mm. And in the Klondike-Smoky City neighborhood, there are some real issues around youth gangs and youth violence. And oftentimes our young girls are looked over, especially when it comes to that topic. And we were very deliberate in stating that, but we were also very deliberate in creating a program for two specific young girls in the community who needed an opportunity like this, an opportunity for them to learn a skill, learn a trade, but also be paid for their creative input, to really juxtapose this idea of you are valued, right? And you are valued in this way. And that's why we chose to work specifically with girls, because they are overlooked when it comes to this idea of mentorship and what does it mean around the context of youth and gang violence. And you know, I need to be honest and say that when talking with my partner Quincy, and we were talking through this, because you know, Quincy is my community expert. She is in that neighborhood doing the work every day. And I am the artist expert, and together we create a unit, right? And when talking with her, I asked the question of, are you sure? Quite honestly, are you sure? And she said, I couldn't be, you know, more positive about this. And during the pilot year, it became apparent that we needed to work with girls because we lost one. Unfortunately, she was gunned down. And
I remember when that happened.
Yeah, and it was a very obviously a sad moment, but it really shook us to a point where we had to recalibrate, but we also had to give us time to grieve for that. But it was in that moment where I was like, I get it. Yeah, I get it. And you're absolutely right. This is for girls.
Wow. Very, very compelling story. And once again, Brittney, congratulations on the Kresge Foundation grant.
Thank you.
I wanted to catch up with you and find out, what is Brittney up to? I know you just recently came back from a trip to Spain, right?
Yes. Yeah.
How did that motivate you, charge you up as an artist?
So Spain was a very introspective trip for me. Knowing that I was going to Spain, I was obviously excited about, as an artist, seeing all the museums and seeing Spain has all the good work, by the way. Like, it has Spain has all the master's work that you learn about in art history. So I was excited about that. But what I didn't realize that I was going to get from that trip was this idea for me because I'm a planner. So to plan what I need to plan, but also be flexible and fluid and nimble when I need to be nimble. So I literally, my husband and I, when we went, we had days where we didn't have anything on the agenda. And that was scary for me. But at the same time needed, because it was an opportunity for me to like sit in a space that was unfamiliar because I had no agenda, but then also look at what that would actually mean for me when I came back to Memphis. Like, what would it look like if I gave myself permission to just be in a space and play, and especially in my studio kind of thing. So it was a very personal, introspective trip for me, in addition to just Barcelona and Madrid are beautiful. Architecturally, they feed your soul, and just a really inspiring place to be in. So yeah.
Well, tell everyone how they can reach you, how they can learn more about your products and your work and your programs.
Nice. Yeah. So I am on Instagram at don'tblink_BB. I also have a Facebook page, and that page is Brittney Bullock, and you can find me there. I also have a website, and that is don'tblinkbb.com. So I am definitely accessible. You can email me directly from my website. I get those right into my inbox. So I am around for sure.
Well, thank you, Brittney. Please, listeners, follow her on Instagram, follow her on Facebook, contact her. You've been listening to the Artivism podcast on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I've been speaking to the very talented artist, creative entrepreneur, Brittney Bullock, and I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I'm out. You will find the Artivism podcast at the intersection of art and social activism. Artivism is executive produced by ArtUp, hosted by Linda Steele, produced, directed, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN.